Tory, every weekday afternoon from 4 till 7 on newstalk1010.com.
You wouldn't build a boat out of hundreds of small pieces stuck together with gaskets and sealant and then put it in the water and expect it to float without any leaks for 25 or 30 years. But we regularly build the enclosure systems for major buildings, condos and commercial buildings, out of hundreds of small pieces.
That was the voice of David House. He seems to be at the root of this whole story that all of our condo buildings are kind of falling down. I mean, wouldn't you think somebody other than him, might have been onto this before now if this was really true that they're taking, what did he say, gaskets and chewing gum and chicken wire and building all our condos out of that stuff and they're all going to fall down? Is he the only guy that's got this figured out? Now, I'll say I live in a condo, okay? So if that gives me an interest in this, then so be it. But I live in one of those shiny new glass and steel towers. There is no place in North America where there are more towers under construction, and most of them, as you know, are condos. We actually need more commercial buildings that people can work in, let alone live in. But most of the condos that are being built are the glass and steel kind, which you will admit, I'm sure, they look crisp and they look modern. Though I do wish myself that more of the condos had a more memorable design to them, like, say, the Marilyn Monroe Towers, so-called, in Mississauga, or even the new building rising next to the Sony Centre down by the train tracks. Anyway, all this building should be good news for Toronto, construction jobs, new housing, and all that stuff. But wait a minute. Along comes the aptly named David House, himself a developer, obviously not in the club, I guess, which may be a good thing. I don't know. But what's he got to say? Well, he says all those shiny new condo towers will be falling apart 10 or 15 years after they're built, meaning now. Some of them might be falling apart sooner because they've already been up for a number of years, and they will all need very expensive retrofits. Specifically, he says, it's about the glass, stupid. Yes, it looks great from the outside, and the views are great from the inside, but according to David House, a lot of these buildings are what he calls throwaway buildings. Throwaway buildings, obviously put together, as he was saying, with gaskets and chewing gum and crazy glue or whatever, and that between 5 and 15 years from now, many of those units will fail, meaning glass problems with leakage, insulation failure, huge energy cost increases, and, of course, declining resale prices. You don't have to think back too far to recall the same wave of leaky water, damaged condos which hit Vancouver. Do you remember that? And it cost a lot of people a lot of grief and money. And by people, I mean the owners. And I think in the end, it ended up costing the developers and the government because they ended up having some kind of a class action proceeding and funds were set up to help people with these terrible leaky condos. And there were indeed lots of buildings that were affected by this, built under a particular building code or whatever, or not built under a building code. But the bottom line was it was a real problem. In fact, some of the 10-year-old condos, because the boom has been on for that long now, as you know, are already showing, apparently, some of these signs of age with glass needing replacement. Not only is the glass nice to look at and to look through, but apparently it is cheaper for developers, and we're going to have somebody on from the development industry to talk about all this in a moment. But that, of course, also means, they say, that if it's cheaper, it's not as durable as something else they might have built those buildings with. Now, I know with a house you buy, aside from a limited time warranty when you buy a new house, there is no guarantee it won't fall apart in 15 years, let alone 15 minutes. But the suggestion coming from the development industry that it is up to us to ask the tougher questions, and that's one of the answers that come to what I think are equally ridiculous, overreaching statements made by Mr. House. The suggestion that somehow it's up to us to ask tougher questions when we buy a condo may well be sensible. Yes, you should ask questions, buyer beware and all that. But surely, with this new construction, we have the right to expect that our governments will insist on and enforce minimum design and construction standards, which will see a building last a lot longer than 15 years without major issues, either of it falling apart or having to pay for it all over again by rebuilding the whole of the outside. Because, there's no developer left at that stage. As you know, the condo is then owned by the condo corporation. And who is that? It's all the people who live there. When people are stretching themselves to the breaking point to buy housing in Toronto, whether it's single-family housing or condos, when for most people, given prices, their condo is their biggest and maybe their only asset, I think we deserve better from our governments and from developers than buildings which will be in need of massive retrofits in 10 years. I mean, it's fine to put the onus on us to insist on green buildings and long-lasting construction, but speaking for myself, I wouldn't know good glass from bad. I wouldn't know a green building from another one unless somebody told me it was a green building. Sure, I understand the concept of buyer beware, so do all of you, and all that good stuff. But surely, so I don't think it's fair to just walk in, plop your money down, not ask a single question, not look around, and just say, I'll take this one. I think that's less than expected from us. But I think we have the right to expect certain minimum quality standards, no matter what price range, no matter what location the building is in. So I would say to you, before we have on somebody from the development industry, some clarity from condo developers, please, as to exactly what they're telling us about the quality standards and durability of these buildings. Some encouragement for developers to offer that clarity from the governments, please. I think you shouldn't be telling them exactly how to build buildings, but you should have codes in place and encourage them strongly to offer clarity. And for Mr. House, stop with the histrionics. I mean, this is just, to me, obviously some effort this guy wanted to make to get himself in the newspaper, to say all the buildings are going to fall down. Simple as that. They're all built with, what did he say, gaskets and chewing gum. I mean, get serious. Joe Vaccaro is the Vice President of Government Relations for BILD, GTA. BILD is the Building and Land Industry Development Organization that represents a lot of the people that build the housing and the condos. Joe, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, John. Thank you for having me.
Good. Well, thanks for coming on. Now, I mean, this fellow, Mr. House, has us all sort of thinking we should be going down to the store and buying a hard hat and maybe sort of hiding out in the basement somewhere because all these buildings are going to be collapsing in 10 years. And somehow I just can't imagine that every developer, every city government, everybody was asleep at the switch when we built these buildings, as he described them, with gaskets and chewing gum.
Well, I think what the report fails to recognize is that the building process is a process of continuous improvement. So along with having building codes in place, Ontario building codes in place, engineering stamps, reviews of that nature, there's a whole regime there that supports the construction of these buildings, the inspection process, and also at the back end of that, obviously, is a warranty program that in many cases provides the consumer with additional protections in terms of the actual structure and the housing that you are ultimately moving into.
I don't think most of that warranty goes, though, as long as the 10 or 15 year time frame he's talking about when he says the glass is going to start to come apart and leak and all that bad stuff.
Well, I mean, specific to what he's speaking about, I mean, we're looking at a technology that was introduced into the process 30 years ago. It has evolved, it has improved as per building code, as for engineering standards and designs. Again, there's a whole regulatory process here that is always looking to continuous improvement. That improvement is not just about the product quality and its performance, but also speaks to public safety and other aspects of the building structure.
All right. Now, you would have heard about this in your position, meaning you and the organization of BILD that represents all the developers. Are you seeing, say, from buildings that were built 10 years ago, not 30, but 10 years ago, with technology that's not right up to date but is, only 10 years old, are you seeing a lot of complaints about leaky buildings or glass that's causing big problems and has to be replaced at a cost of millions?
Well, I think what we're seeing is the reality is that buildings need to be maintained. And part of the reality of purchasing a condo is that you are paying a condo fee that feeds into a reserve fund. And that reserve fund is based on the understanding that there will be parts of that building that will be updated, retrofitted, renewed as part of a regular schedule for maintenance of a building. Really no different than your own home. I mean, you recognize that the caulking around your home will need to be replaced in 6 or 7 years. It's just part of the regular maintenance.
Sure, you got to put on a new roof. But I guess what I'm asking you is, are you hearing reports at the BILD industry offices of wholesale need to replace all the glass in big, tall towers? Because that's really what Mr. House is talking about, and I'm sure the answer is either yes or no. We've either heard of regular maintenance, which I don't think people would think contemplates replacing all the glass in an entire building or fixing every window.
Well, I would say at this point we have not heard mass-scale requirements for major changes, major retrofits required on these buildings, no.
All right. Well, look, that's fair enough. Now, I talked about the fact that we need more clarity from the development industry about, what the standards are that they apply. And I realize they'll say the ones that are in the law, the building code and so on. But, could we maybe count on a bit more reassurance in some of the marketing materials and some of the stuff you get when you go buy one of these condos about exactly what you do have the right to expect, how long the glass will last, and so on and so on?
Well, absolutely. And consumers, when they ask those questions, and they look through their condo documents, will get answers to those questions. The reality is you have a building code that is reviewed and renewed every 5 years, which is the Ontario law. And then in Toronto specifically, there's a building standard, a green building standard, in many cases, which applies an even higher standard. So the reality is that consumers, when they walk into a sales office, have the right to ask those questions, and developers have the ability to answer those questions, knowing full well that they're providing a product that not only meets a minimum standard, which is the building code, but in many cases is working toward the standards even higher than that.
I appreciate you coming on with us, Joe Vaccaro from BILD, the building industry organization. Have you put out a statement that in any way takes on some of what Mr. House is saying here? Because he certainly does paint the whole condo industry and all the buildings that have been built by all of your members with a pretty broad brush.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to work through, I guess, the last pieces of what's being reported out there, get a sense of what exactly is being stated out there, and we are prepared to respond in kind. I think what the public needs to understand and appreciate is there's a building code process, there's an entire regime there to support and ensure that what you're getting as a product in the condo end is a product you can have confidence in, that you can live safely in, and that you can ultimately enjoy as a resident.
All right, well, I think that's what people want, and they expect the developers and their governments to kind of stand behind these things to make sure that that's what they get. You know, they don't expect perfection, but they sure expect a pretty high standard, and I think that's reasonable. Joe Vaccaro, VP Government Relations for BILD GTA, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you very much.